Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I am your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and I'm super excited to be joined today by my colleague, Assemblywoman Kate Sanchez from Assembly District 71, which includes Orange County and Riverside County, if I read that correctly. And I'm really excited about this because I've been trying to get Kate on for a long time. And welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your district to start, like where you represent. I'm not super familiar with Riverside and Orange County because I'm up here in Northern California, but
Sure.
Yeah, what's going on down there?
It's a great district. We have a lot of great cities, Mission Viejo, Ranch Santa Margarita. We have a lot of unincorporateds, and then we hop over the 74, so a mountain range divides us, and we have Temecula, Marietta, and Riverside County. So
Nice.
it's a big
Okay.
district.
So like how long does it take you to drive, like when you're doing district stuff?
Sure. Like an hour and a half, 2 hours,
Okay.
depending on the time of day.
That's pretty significant
Yeah,
for sure.
it's an awesome district.
It sounds like a great district. Those are great places. Mine is like, I'm super lucky because I get to live near the Capitol, which, obviously has its advantages and disadvantages, but also like it takes like maybe 45 minutes to drive across my district. So, which I mean
must be nice.
Is pretty great,
Yeah.
to be honest with
Yeah.
you. Some of our colleagues, it's even smaller, like in the cities and stuff,
It's true.
geographically, but then there's way more traffic. So
Yeah.
I don't want to trade that. But so what, tell us a little bit about your background, kind of what brought you to the legislature.
Sure. So I'm actually third generation Californian. My grandmother and her sister grew up picking grapes in the Central Valley. And I'm so glad to be able to call this my home. This is my district. It's where I was born and raised, and I'm raising my son.
Awesome.
And my family still lives there. So, it was interesting because I worked for Darrell Issa for some time, Congressman Issa.
Yeah.
And I really loved the local politics part of, being in Orange County and Riverside County. But through COVID, we really saw a lot of government overreach from a parent perspective. And it really opened my eyes and a lot of my, parents' eyes in the district that said, we need somebody to fight for us. We need somebody to make sure that our voices are heard.
Yep.
And I think that just spans more so seeing all of the, overreach, things like that.
Yeah.
So got involved.
That's awesome.
I think I was talking to somebody yesterday, and probably the biggest surprise, if you looked from the Sacramento lens, as far as a race up here.
Well, yeah, because if I remember correctly, there were like 2 Republicans in that race, right?
Yeah.
And everyone was like, I guess, kind of surprised. We didn't even know each other really when you won.
No. Well, and honestly, in full disclosure, I said my goal and what I'm going to be doing is representing the people. So that means you listen, you knock thousands of doors, right?
Yeah.
And I know I was a big upset for Sacramento.
Hey, so was I, to be fair. So, I beat an incumbent Democrat, but at the same time, it's, I think that the values that you bring up here when you're maybe not projected to end up here, definitely do align more with your community.
And I'm trying to find that balance, right? Of being thoughtful of our stakeholders and thoughtful of our district. But quite honestly, it's been an incredible journey, and it's an honor. And I recently received Legislator of the Year in Orange County last week.
That's awesome.
And it's an honor to be here.
I saw that, actually. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. That's exciting. So, it's so interesting what you say too about the overreach and really how COVID and the pandemic really opened people's eyes about like everything wrong with government, especially when they saw it so locally in their schools.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone today I was on a school board during COVID, which was one of the craziest things I've ever been through in terms of just trying to govern and fight for in-person instruction and fight against all of these forces that wanted to keep our kids at home, which just drove me insane as a parent myself. I mean, we both have kids, and any parent will tell you, and that you heard from many of them, I'm sure, that like nobody seems to care about my kids,
right.
And so when I got elected in 2018 to the school board, and I think the first thing I pushed for was to live stream all of our board meetings. So up until that point, 2018, like you'd think, we didn't have any public like access to the board unless you like physically went there and like participated. So I'm like, we really should be live streaming these board meetings, allowing parents to participate remotely. or at least view what's going on.
Did you receive any kickback or push from other members or administration that wouldn't allow that, or
I mean,
was everybody pretty supportive?
there was a little bit of tension
Sure.
from like one particular board member, but most of it surrounded like the cost of it, right? Like the technology and implementing the cost and everything. And which I understand, that's fair, but it's like this is democracy, right? This is like our deliberative process. And so, surprisingly, I got a ton of support for it from like almost every board member.
Good.
I ended up getting all the administration and the staff on board, and even the teachers union came on board at the end of during the process. And so, like, we get this thing passed, we get it implemented, big victory. Within my first year on the board, I like got one of my big priorities accomplished. And I was thinking, and this is going to be great. Like, this is just going to be so easy. And like, I'm going to be able to get so much done.
Yeah.
And then 2020 came and I was like, wait a second, like, never mind. Yeah. And everything ended. Everything stopped. Like kids got sent home. Nobody knew what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
And it put a pause on like, I had joined the board to like be a voice for my kids, right? And my community in education. And to help improve our schools, and I ended up fighting to keep them open. You know what I mean?
That's
Which
wild.
Who would have ever imagined?
But you were at the
right?
right place at the right time, right? You were meant to be there. So that's
well. I mean, I'm glad I was there looking back.
Yeah.
Beforehand, but it's really great that you say that, because I think that definitely still resonates with a lot of people, and a lot of people still remember the craziness, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
So tell me a little bit about some of the things you're working on this year. Like, what do you want to do up here in Sacramento?
Yeah. So we have a few bills left that are alive, but we were working on a lot of public safety bills, right? Being a voice for our most vulnerable and protecting innocence for our children. So we have a few AI bills, and they're sponsored bills. The Orange County Sheriff.
Okay.
And a lot of support. They sailed through public safety, so now we're waiting in approps.
Yeah.
But there was an HR resolution that I introduced that would limit the amount of bills that someone can introduce in a cycle. And I remember listening to your podcast with, was it Juan?
We talked about it with Juan.
Okay,
it was Juan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will say, full disclosure, I am under my bill limit still, so we're good. But
I did call you out for that.
You definitely did.
Has anyone counted Kate Sanchez's bills? So for the record, for the listeners, it would essentially, right now you can introduce 50 bills per legislative session, which is 2 years.
2-year session.
So over a 2-year period.
Yeah.
But for people that don't know, like just like 6 years ago, it was 40.
Correct.
Over a 2-year span. And they upped it to 50 for some reason. And it's just way too many bills. Like, we have over, what was it, like, I want to say around the 5,000 bills per 2 years that we have to like go through.
And I feel like we should be focusing on quality at this point, not quantity. Totally. And I think when you give people or 120 legislators full-time jobs to create more laws, you're going to get something that is a lot of noise and not necessarily substance.
Exactly. Yeah. So one example of that, I'm trying to pull up the poll here. So last week we talked about that CLEAR bill.
Okay.
The bill to ban CLEAR at California airports.
Yeah.
Which again is just one of those where it's like, I'm sure people have different opinions on it, but it just doesn't seem like it should be a priority, right, for our legislature.
Right. Or I don't know about you or your district, but when I'm getting calls like, can I afford, to be able to fill up my gas tank or turn on, heating in my house, or how do I pay for groceries? I feel like the CLEAR bill maybe.
Yeah, it just seems like the wrong, focus, I guess.
Yes.
So we did the poll last week, and we'll get into our question of the week in a few minutes here.
Okay.
But last week's poll was, should the legislature do that, essentially ban or prohibit, the expansion.
What was the response?
Of CLEAR? It was 87% no, 4% yes, and 9% doesn't matter. So pretty much like over 90% were like, why are we talking about this, right? So I think, to your point, I love that. I love that idea. Would definitely support that. Obviously, it hasn't happened this year, but
maybe in the future.
Maybe. I think we keep trying. I mean, look, I don't think we need 5,000 bills. I think most of my constituents would say we probably need fewer bills and fewer laws.
Yep.
Maybe let's fix the stuff that is, a problem, whether it's crime or homelessness or cost of living. Like, let's focus on those things. Maybe repeal some laws that we don't need anymore, right?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
And we'll get into one of your other bills in a minute here too
Oh.
that you're working on. So but before we do though, you just brought this up to me before we started the show, and now we have to talk about it because I think it's hilarious.
Okay.
So Cal Matters has this page. You can go to called Digital Democracy. It's actually a really neat tool if anyone's hasn't used it. It essentially has like a database of California legislators, where they stand on issues, maybe their backgrounds. It also talks about the bills they've introduced, and it's got a ton of great content. I actually really love what Cal Matters is doing with this, but it's digitaldemocracy.calmatters.org. And so I didn't even know this existed, but if you go to Digital Democracy at the bottom of the page, there's like a top 10 and bottom 10 lists of legislators. And one of the categories, they've got all kinds of categories, like age. Like, are we on the age? Are we on the younger? Are we on the lowest?
I think Greg Wallace is the youngest of our.
No, you beat Greg, don't you?
No.
Greg is younger.
Yes.
Okay, we're both on the lowest though. We're
really
both in the
under 40.
The youngest 10 legislators, you and I.
Really?
And Greg Wallace,
go.
who by the way will be on next week.
There we go.
Is number 3. So Greg Wallace is the third youngest legislator at 33.
Who is the youngest?
I'll give you a guess. One guess.
Who?
We have one legislator in their 20s, and that's Alex Lee. So Alex is 28.
Yeah.
Isaac Bryan is 32, and then Greg is 33. So, but you come in at number 5 youngest at 35. I love how I'm just totally calling you out.
That's all good.
I'm like calling everybody out, and I am the ripe old age at number 8 of 36.
Ripe old age,
just ahead of you there.
Great.
Yeah, that's actually pretty funny too.
It's a cool tool.
But this is kind of a neat tool. It's not. Yeah. It's neat to. I won't read the oldest people. We'll leave that one alone. But
that's funny.
But there's one category here that is the most talkative. Like, how do they even measure this? Do they go through? I guess their tool like watches committees and transcribes them. So it's just like how much transcription from you. That's so trippy to me. So the highest, most talkative to least talkative. And you are proudly at number 1 on the least talkative members of the legislature.
I guess so.
That is pretty impressive. That is pretty impressive.
I mean, I feel like I consciously made an effort to listen a lot up here as opposed to like everybody talks a lot. And I think you can learn so much by listening. But I didn't realize I had beat Phil Chen out. Or
that's pretty impressive. Phil Chen is not a talker either. So yeah, you're number 1. So I was actually lucky to get you on this podcast because like, I'm like, man.
An hour long is a long time to chit chat.
It is. But it's kind of refreshing though, that you're like, I just want to listen. I want to listen. I think, like this is just, we don't have enough of that. We don't have enough of the listening and the contemplating and the actual like weighing of things up here.
Right. And I feel like a lot of people come into our office and ask us to solve problems, right?
Yeah.
And so part of what we're supposed to be doing is to listen to industry leaders, right? Our stakeholders and, hey, help me figure out how to problem solve. And so I feel like that is what I see my role as too, right?
Yeah, totally.
So
no,
we'll get there though. I'm definitely
awesome.
gonna work on being a lot more chatty.
Well, you got to do what's comfortable. I think it's funny because I just joined Transportation Committee where we both are on now. And you told me after like the second hearing, like, I love like having you on here. You talk so much.
You do.
But I'm not on either of these lists. I am not on like the high or the low end.
We'll keep checking back. Not yet.
I'm somewhere in between. I'm like, I have certain things I really like to talk about or question or whatever. And then
but you always have, and I so enjoy that. You're always so thoughtful about, your responses and questions about, I love it. You're a refreshing voice on transportation.
Transportation's been interesting. So that's an interesting committee.
It's awesome.
I think what I talk about it a lot in my district. I have a community meeting tonight. Actually, we're recording this on a Wednesday. And we talk a lot about how we pay the highest gas taxes in the nation and we drive on the 46th ranked roads in the nation. And it's like, those two things don't make any sense.
Nope.
Our communities, especially, you have a lot of unincorporated.
Yep.
Our unincorporated communities get so left out of the roads.
They do.
And their roads are just so terrible. And like, we're not, the money that they're paying to drive and use their vehicles is not going to the roads.
Yep.
And it's just, and like the first week in Transportation Committee, I voted against like 2 bills. I think you did too, to like, not divert those
More
dollars
funds
away.
Yeah.
It's like
Yes.
crazy. So,
And we have a huge commuter district. At least I do.
yeah,
And it's
for
just,
sure.
it's wild to see the
I think we
misuse
both
of
do, yeah.
funds going on up here.
Yeah,
So,
it's really unfortunate. So, well, let's get into our question of the week. And I wanted to talk, this is going to be kind of our topic off the top, is going to be the campus protests that have been going on, obviously, at a lot of our campuses over the past few weeks. A lot of really difficult things going on at our campuses, particularly in California, but there's some other stuff going on across the nation as well. But our question this week, so our colleagues, Assemblymember James Gallagher and Senator Brian Jones, they haven't introduced anything yet, but they basically came out this week and put forward a proposal to essentially say that if you are found to have committed any violent act or criminal act within the context of these protests, that you could have your financial aid revoked, your Cal Grant, essentially. So our question of the week for listeners is going to be, should the state revoke financial aid from student protesters found to have committed violent or criminal acts? And you can go to our Twitter X page at Point of Order Pod to vote on that if you want to share your opinion on that. But
Yep.
I don't know, just like your thoughts. I mean, maybe just your thoughts on all of this craziness in general and what's been going on, and like, I don't know what you think of James's bill.
We were actually tempted to go out to, I know that there was a protest happening last week on the Sacramento campus.
Oh, yeah.
We were considering going out and finding out what's going on. We get a lot of phone calls now from parents that are sending children off to school, right? Or just absolutely beside themselves what's going on at UCLA, right? And so honestly, it's our job to make sure every child feels safe on campus, and it's up to the administrators to do something. And I know that UCLA's administrator is stepping down soon, but every day that goes by, children, I don't care, race or religion, they need to feel safe and secure on campus. And I feel like it's about time we do something. It's about time that I love James. Hopefully he does introduce something.
Yeah. No, I agree. So I'm actually a UCLA alum. And so
how do you feel about all of this?
Watching it, I've actually been talking with some of my former classmates and professors the last week about, like a couple of people reached out, like, what are your thoughts on this? Like, this is crazy. And it honestly, it's really sad to watch. Number one, I think it's a failure of leadership by campus administration and by the governor.
Big time.
I think, and the fact that things were allowed to get as far as they did. I think when we saw this early on, the campuses that didn't see the violence we saw at UCLA, they nipped it in the bud from the beginning, right? And we want to respect free speech, right? And I think we both agree with that. And it's really critical that we allow protests and free speech to take place on college campuses. But there is a clear line between free speech and lawbreaking. And as soon as these encampments cross that line, we should have intervened, and we didn't do that at UCLA, and it led to a terrible peak of violence that should never have been allowed to occur. And so, it's really sad as a former student there, what number one, our Jewish students had to go through leading up to that point. Just being barred from classes, not being able to go to certain areas of the campus, absolutely unacceptable. And that should have, been stopped from the beginning. And then the aftermath. So the encampment's been cleared at UCLA now, but I don't know if you've ever been to UCLA.
Not for a few years.
But they have Royce Hall, which is one of the most iconic university buildings in the nation. Probably, it's in like a bunch of movies. Like any movie that Hollywood films, they film it right there.
Right?
Completely vandalized. And if you go, there's videos online, but it's just like spray paint, graffiti everywhere. Just completely destroyed this like historic brick and stone and everything. And it's like, why did we allow this to happen? So,
it's an absolute failure on leadership's part.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, I think it'll be interesting to see the chair of the budget committee has not given his opinion yet on Gallagher and Jones's proposal on financial aid. We're obviously in the middle of a budget crisis ourselves, and I think they're making a decent point that, hey, if you have to earn scholarships, you have to earn
Correct.
financial aid. It's a privilege. It's not a right, right? And if you're found to have done something criminal or violent, then that needs to be addressed. But we'll see what the listeners think. You can vote on that at Point of Order Pod on our Twitter or X page. You have an interesting bill too on addressing the issue from a few weeks ago where the protesters stopped the Bay Bridge. Or was it the Golden Gate Bridge?
Yes.
Golden Gate Bridge. Stopped traffic. Obviously impeded emergency vehicles. What's going on with that bill?
So actually, that was quite an interesting bill, and I think it's a very timely bill as to what's going on now. There was a freeway blockage that had impeded for 4 to 6 hours all lanes of traffic, right? So there were 2 examples in ABC7 article coverage that said there were 2 different surgeries that someone was going to receive. In one case, someone was going to receive a blood transfusion, was not able to get to the hospital in time. And another person, organ surgery, was not able to get to the hospital in time. We see a lot of examples, whether it's in California across the nation, where organs are either delayed or completely unable to be viable. So when this came up, my team and I talked, and we said we want a bill that would just simply double penalties for anyone that decides to block and impede a emergency vehicle from passing. So when the siren lights are flashing or lights are on, to allow them to pass. It's not at all a infringement on their rights. It's just simply keeping people safe. And I think honestly, if there's one death or one delay as far as medically, that's too much.
Right.
So that was quite a dramatic committee when we heard that in committee, but it is out of the committee and it's now hopefully, well, we'll see what happens with it.
Is it in appropriations? Or, okay.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I think it's waiting to go to the Senate because this would fiscally.
Oh, there's no fiscal impact.
No,
so it's just
in
going
fact,
to
it would help our. There is a fiscal. It's a positive for the state.
That's
I think.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. No. So just so you know, too, we pulled that bill a couple weeks ago, and listeners liked it. So,
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Because I think again, it's we obviously support and acknowledge that you have the right to protest what you believe. But you don't have the right to impede, for example, someone from getting to work or someone from getting medical treatment. I mean, these are not things that, the First Amendment, covers. And so,
and right now the fine increase and all that, we can get into the weeds another time, but truly it's nothing. It's negligible as far as it's less than a speeding traffic ticket. So, this would just make it a little more, have more tools in the toolbox for people to enforce these laws and take them more seriously.
Well, I hope it keeps moving forward. I think it got pretty good support. And I think I was on the committee where you heard it. Was it transportation?
Yeah.
I think it was transportation. So, that was really good to see the bipartisan support for it.
It was quite a big ask, and I understand that. And I have the greatest respect for our chair. And I think it was nice to see a bipartisan effort just to crack down on these kinds of illegal protests.
And I think on these issues, it's so important to have that bipartisan kind of
agree.
Agreement, because these are difficult issues, right? And it's good to show that together, we're working together and kind of in alignment on some things in California.
Well, yeah, I agree with you on that.
I mean, we're not on a lot of things, but there are certain things where I think we can work together on, right?
And it's important to find out where we have synergy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think especially being sensitive to what the makeup of our legislature looks like right now.
Yeah.
We need to make sure we find places that we can work together then.
For sure. Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts of the campus protest for me was kind of the frustration with the law enforcement issue. So, UCs, I think a lot of people don't realize this, but UCs in the Constitution are their own entity. So they have constitutional separation essentially from the rest of the state. So for example, the legislature can't even tell them to do anything. So if we passed a bill, if you ever see a higher ed bill, I don't know if you've ever been on that committee or anything, but I'm not. But if you look at a higher education bill,
sure.
When we require things of our universities, it'll say this requires the CSU, the California State University System, to do this,
Mm,
and it requests that the UC system do this. So it actually like breaks it out
sure.
because constitutionally, the UC system is an individual entity, constitutionally
Right.
separate from, which a lot of people don't realize. But because of that, they control what happens on their campus, right? And so they are held responsible, for addressing these
Right.
situations. So, people were frustrated, like, well, first of all, leading up to it, I saw a number of people saying, we don't want law enforcement here. We don't need law enforcement here. Okay. And then when the violence broke out, well, where was law enforcement? Why wasn't law enforcement protecting us? It's like you can't have it both
No,
ways, right?
no.
But at the end of the day, they needed permission from the administrators to come onto campus, and they
Wow.
got that very late in the game. And I think it's really I felt like law enforcement was treated very unfairly in this whole process, and a lot of it was just people not understanding how it even worked.
Yeah.
Like, why didn't LAPD respond? Why didn't CHP respond? They don't have the authority to, unless administration allows them to, which is really
That's a
interesting.
good perspective to
So
share.
yeah, it was
That's great.
interesting, but I'm hoping that we have learned some lessons as a university system in California, and we'll continue to, hopefully learn from those and avoid this in the future. But let's jump into our stories of the week. I've got some fun stuff to talk about here. The one off the top, our colleague Vince Fong had a bill to essentially eliminate the use of NDAs in the legislative process. We've talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but essentially this stemmed from the minimum wage negotiation for fast food workers, where it came to light that the negotiations at the table between labor unions and business interests, actually a number of folks signed NDAs and non-disclosure agreements and basically committed to not talking about the negotiations.
Right.
Assemblymember Fong's point is that in the legislative process, this should be a public, forum and a public discussion. We should not be using NDAs in that process. So he brought that bill, I believe, in front of the Elections Committee, and they voted that down
Right.
about a week ago now. So a little bit of an older story now, but
I
I
feel
just thought it
like,
was
though,
worth
what we're seeing
mentioning.
as an overarching theme, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you can appreciate this, but that lack of transparency, right, that's
Yeah.
going on, lack of allowing the public to see really how
Yeah.
deals are made or thoughts are formed or bills are
Yeah.
worked out through committees. And I
Totally.
think when not only you're seeing this and you're seeing bills rush through process, we need to have good discussions on these before we're getting thousands of bills. That how do we, it's important for us to have more
So
transparency.
true. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it's really important. And I mean, it wasn't too many years ago that like we didn't have the 72-hour rule. So that this is like in the last decade or so where a bill has to be in print for 3 days before it can be voted
yep.
on in its final form. Um, like it used to be, you could amend a bill an hour before session adjourned,
Right.
and the public would have zero time to look at it. You know what I mean? And it's like, thank goodness we've made some improvements, but the legislature has always kind of struggled with this,
Right.
right? Struggled with transparency.
And I have to
And
say, unless you're involved in like the 10, 15-mile radius or involved in the Capitol,
right,
so many people in your district have busy, full lives,
of
right? They're
course, yeah,
not necessarily on the
right,
computer all day or tracking where a bill and where it's
yeah.
being edited
They're
or
not scrolling Twitter all day,
thank you.
like
Yes, right. They have full lives, they have
yeah,
children or,
yeah,
grandkids. So
totally,
or working one or two jobs to be able to
exactly,
afford California. So
exactly,
it's definitely a frustrating
yeah.
piece of this process.
Yeah, it really is, and this is kind of the latest iteration in that, like, kind of, I guess, where a lot of us didn't even know this was happening.
Right.
Like, I mean, to be honest with you, we're in the building on a daily basis, and we don't even hear about all this stuff.
Yeah.
So imagine what it's like for a member of the public, that just wants to know what's going on.
Yep.
So
Yep.
unfortunately, this bill is not moving forward. We'll see if it comes back in a future year or future session. But I think at the very least, I hope that the press stays really on top of when these are
Yes.
being used or asking if these are being used in negotiations, because like it really is a red flag, I think, when you have to sign an NDA to negotiate a bill, right?
That's wild.
And there was also a story that came out that a former legislator had actually signed one themselves. I don't know if you saw that
I
one.
did.
And I was like, wait a second. That is,
Yeah.
the argument up until this point is, well, we're not talking about the legislators. We're talking about the interests, right? Okay. But like,
It's
how often
wild.
has this been used? I don't know. Another fun bill that got introduced, and I say fun with quotes around it. It should. So there's a new bill in California that would limit self-service checkout stations and restrict them to 10 items or fewer. Did you see this one?
I did.
So California grocery drugstores would be prohibited from operating a self-checkout without adequate staffing. I believe in the bill, it's one staffer per 2 self-checkouts, which is very different than how it's working right now.
Yeah.
This is Senate Bill 1446. And then, so one cashier per, per 2 checkout stations. And then in addition, the bill would require self-service checkouts to be limited to 10 items or fewer. So just across the board, no more than 10 items.
This goes back to, I'm telling you, when you have 120 people up here where there's full-time job to create more laws. This gets me so frustrated. It's
I know.
Sacramento micromanaging at its best.
Oh, for sure.
And these are, drives me drives me nuts.
I know. It's, I'm very upset about this bill. I think,
why is why are we telling a business,
this?
right?
Yeah.
This is,
well, and now we're telling them they have to enforce this essentially, right? Because so we're asking our stores to be like, hey, make sure no one's over 10 items. Cause it's not like we're going to have law enforcement in there enforcing this, right?
This is just another overreach and another just please stay out. Sacramento, just stay out.
Yeah. So I think the really interesting part of this bill that has been even more frustrating to me is that the author of the bill is saying that this is to reduce retail theft. Okay, so the argument being that, well, the real reason that we have so much retail theft is because we have too many self-checkouts. And so we need to make sure we're cracking down on self-checkouts, as opposed to cracking down on the policies that actually got us into this mess in the first place, like Proposition 47, like all of the things we've done to decriminalize crime in California. And so it is, that is just a mind-blowing argument to me to say that this is going to solve retail theft.
Well, and I feel like, again, we're missing the mark on this, right? You're trying to put a little Band-Aid and let's go to the core of the issue. Like you said, the policies that got us here in the first place, as opposed to putting a Band-Aid after the fact of something happening like this. This is just so frustrating.
So we'll see if this moves forward or not. I personally, I don't want there to be a bill, but I want the stores in my community that don't have self-checkouts to install them. I am so pro self-checkout. It's not even funny.
Awesome.
It is. I mean, half the time I am running in for 10 items or less. Right. And I'm like, I just want to get in. I want to get out. I mean, even Costco has self-checkout now.
They do.
And which is a game changer. It's awesome. But it's like, why? Like, what are we like? Let businesses operate their businesses.
Yep.
The ones that don't have them, they should be able to do that.
Yep.
The ones that do, they should be able to do that. But it's like, I just love the self-checkout. I'm like Walmart all day long. Just
it's pretty.
Like,
it's
go in for
efficient.
dog food.
Yeah.
Leave right away.
That's right.
It's great.
No waiting.
So anyway, I do not want to see the impacts of this bill on the customer too, because that it's going to lead to more lines and more, more like tensions between workers and customers, and it's just going to be a mess.
And it's also harder on businesses, right? I mean, this is another overreach and another impediment that business owners are now having to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Well, and anytime we increase costs on businesses, those always get passed along
to the consumer.
So, so that'll be an interesting one to watch. We'll keep an eye on that one. Speaking of retail theft, we'll get into some stuff on crime here, but there's a new study that came out that said that California is a wallet hub study. So I don't know how legit it is, but that was funny. That California is the best place in the nation to be a police officer. And most of that was due to, starting salaries, I think it has the fourth highest wages for law enforcement in the country. Obviously training
Hmm.
and benefits and things like that. Um, which I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think from a numbers perspective, that would make sense. And as far as I'm looking at the list and rankings of
Yeah,
states that are offering the salaries and the benefits,
yeah,
but I've heard from so many of the police officers in my district
yeah.
that have said the attitude toward police officers or public safety in
Totally.
general has been so demoralizing.
Yep.
And I wish they had included
Yeah.
that in this study because I don't think it would have been the same survey.
It's not a metric that they include, and I think it's probably a hard one to measure, but it's something that we hear all the time.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I thought I brought this story up just because I'm hearing the opposite from our law enforcement, not from the standpoint of we don't like working here, because obviously the pay and the benefits are better than a lot of places in other parts of the country,
Right.
but they cannot hire people. There is a staff shortage at probably every law enforcement
Yes.
agency in the state.
Yes.
And they tell me all the time, we cannot recruit new officers. It is so hard to convince someone to go into the law enforcement profession, and we need good people in that
We
profession.
do.
And a lot of it goes back to your point about like people, the attitude towards law enforcement in California. It's not something people really want to
No.
dive into.
No.
you
I
know?
was talking to a CHP officer in the Riverside portion of our district recently, and he was saying, he goes, my son really wanted to follow in my footsteps, and he had advised him against it because it's so
Wow.
hard for him now.
Yeah.
Just policing the streets or the highways, and
Yeah.
it's hard.
It's hard, and it's obviously already a very stressful job, a very dangerous job,
Sure.
right? So it's already a job that comes with a lot of risks. But then to add on top of that, just kind of the anti-law enforcement sentiment that we see in a lot of communities. I was talking to an officer the other day, and it also, like, I guess depends on the county you're in too.
Oh.
So like Orange County, for example, where you represent part
Yep.
of Orange County, very supportive of law enforcement.
Yes.
At least
Yes.
as a whole, the DA, the community, like they have billboards, I guess, that like.
I would say that in Riverside County as well, though. I have a
Oh, for sure.
phenomenal district
Yeah.
that way. Our public safety officers are
Totally.
top notch.
So Riverside, I assume San Bernardino is similar, right? And Orange County, and so there's a lot of counties where law enforcement is cherished and respected.
Hmm.
But then there's some counties where it's not. It's demonized, right? The profession is really demonized, and even by the leadership in those counties. And so it was just, this was an officer not in Orange. It was, I'll just say, a nearby county to Orange County.
Okay.
And that they're not able to recruit because Orange County is so good for law enforcement.
Wow.
So even though they're willing to pay more in this county,
Yeah.
people don't want to work in that county because they don't feel supported. So
Do you blame them? I mean, do you blame them though?
no, I mean, I don't.
It's
I mean,
such a hard profession.
yeah, it
you
is
know?
for sure.
Ugh.
So, and I think so that kind of goes into our next story, which is another reason I think has been harder for law enforcement is there's this story out that crime is becoming an increasingly large issue for Californians this year. And, I think for law enforcement too, they just feel like a lot of the tools that they normally would use are constantly being taken away or threatened. And so, for example, the canine issue that we've talked about on this podcast before, but I think that could play a role into it too. But this was really interesting. So in the span of a week, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass was the victim of a burglary. Representative Adam Schiff had his suitcase stolen out of his car in the Bay Area, and an officer protecting San Jose Mayor Matt Mahan was hit by a pedestrian while the mayor was filming a television interview. That video kind of went viral. So this happened within the span of a week in California, and the article makes the point that if our public officials are being victimized, how much more are our communities and our constituents being
Yes.
victimized? Right?
I just feel like when will some of our colleagues understand the correlation between soft on crime policies being implemented and passed overwhelmingly to what's happening in our cities, in our neighborhoods, to our people we love, right? So
Yeah.
for me, it's so frustrating to hear this because it's a direct result of what we're seeing every day up here at the Capitol.
Yeah, for sure. And it is. I think people need to know that this came from somewhere, right? This was when you, reduce, you know, decriminalize crimes, and
Yes.
you reduce penalties from felonies to misdemeanors. And when you do all the things that we've done, you get more crime.
Yep.
So um, the Public Policy Institute was referenced in here. A recent survey that found obviously crime is a top priority for Californians as well. But um, really, really unfortunate situations. It's a regular topic of this podcast, so I'll move on. So we don't get any further into it. But yeah, certainly some interesting stories there. The last one I wanted to bring up before we move to our clip of the week is this issue that's going on in my district. So it's actually Sacramento County. Our DA, Tin Ho, has essentially sued the city of Sacramento regarding homelessness.
Mm.
And the original lawsuit, basically, he was trying to find Sacramento liable, I guess, for creating a public nuisance. So it was almost like a really creative way
Yeah.
to get at the homelessness issue, given all the barriers that exist for DAs when it comes to prosecuting and actually, law enforcement from addressing homelessness in our
Mhm.
communities. And so essentially just talking about the pollution of the rivers and the waterways and the streets, obviously, and parks and things like that, and that it has created a public nuisance. So this week, the lawsuit uh, was not dismissed. It's going to be moving forward, but they're requiring him to remove this
Mhm.
public nuisance language out of it. So that will not be a part of the lawsuit moving forward. Um, uh, but they are allowing the suit to move forward for under the claims that the city is violating fish and game code by allowing homelessness to pollute creeks and waterways and things like that.
Okay.
So it's going to be an interesting test case. I mean, we obviously have a larger conversation going on at the Supreme Court with the Grants Pass case. I think that's going to be monumental, but I just appreciate it when DAs get creative in California.
Same.
And I have a ton of respect for my DA in Sacramento County. He's been doing a fantastic job on this issue, but just like get creative. Like, we're not doing enough at the legislative level to
Right.
support on these issues. And I love it when, our DAs are like, hey, we're going to try something new.
And I think it's interesting to see all of this kind of come to a head up and down the state, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter the community, doesn't matter the county. And I'm so encouraged when you see creative ideas like that.
Yeah.
This is great.
For sure.
Hopefully we're going to get movement.
I'm hoping that it'll keep moving. I mean, I am bummed that it got cut up a little bit, but I think just the fact that we're continuing that conversation.
They're going to
is
hear it on
important.
Friday, correct? Or they're going to have more testimony?
So there's more
a ruling coming out
forward,
on
yeah.
Friday? Okay.
There's more coming forward on like, we don't know the results of it yet.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to watch. So
Oh, it's interesting.
on that same topic, I'm going to play you our clip of the week and kind of get your reactions to
Sure.
it. But it is on the topic of homelessness. So just to set it up, we had an oversight hearing this week in Budget Subcommittee number 7. And so this subcommittee is kind of unique. It's chaired by Assemblymember Avelino Valencia. And it's unlike any other committee in the legislature where there's no members of this committee. So it's just a chair. So,
Okay.
and depending on the topic being discussed, the chair gets to select the members he wants for that particular hearing. So it's really interesting.
Interesting.
It was really cool. He called me last week because I had done the homelessness audit and things like that, and invited me to be a part of this committee, which I was grateful to be a part of it. And basically, we all got a chance to grill the Newsom administration on their failures on homelessness. $24 billion of taxpayer dollars spent,
Mhm.
32% increase in homelessness statewide. Just, again, a failure of leadership, in my opinion. And so we got an opportunity to really talk to the state agencies that are running these programs. So I had a fun conversation with them, essentially about my bill to increase transparency in tracking homelessness, costs and effectiveness, and those metrics. ironically, they said, well, we'll support that bill, but we need more money after the $24 billion that we have spent,
Yeah.
right? Like, so
I watched that committee.
it
That was
was,
wild.
yeah. So that was not well received by me.
Yep.
But I'm not gonna play you my stuff because that'd be a little silly. You've heard me this whole time. But I did want to. One of our Democratic colleagues, Assemblymember Phil Ting, really dove into some of the grilling, and I thought did a great job. So we'll play this and get your thoughts.
Okay.
But I don't see, and I appreciate this nice flow chart you did. What I don't see is any of the results of those metrics in the write-up. So what do we have? Because that's what the public wants to know is what's the money been spent on,
Sure. And so Cal ICH is
and how long is it taking, and how long is it taking for the money to be spent?
Cal ICH is working on finalizing its HAP annual report, which will be for rounds 1 through 4, and hope to have that published in short order.
But we don't have any. You're coming to a budget committee and there's no numbers. There's no how many people have we helped, how many people off the street, how many people permanently housed. This is a program, as you have said, which started in 2018 under HEAP, and now we have under 2019.
So one of the things I think it's valuable to be thinking about there is in the beginning of this program, those outcomes were all provided by the grantees.
Understood.
So there was a shift to wanting more data integrity through the HDIS system. And so we are in the first year where that data is going to be available.
The HDIS system is 3 years old, so you're telling me you don't have any data from...
This is going to be the first year where we'll be able to have that data. So
why is it taking 3 years to get data? The system was implemented in 2021.
So
Yeah.
HDIS began in 2021. It wasn't fully implemented until 2022. And so
Okay, that's still 2 years ago. So do we have anything from 2022?
we're, again, apologies.
Why is it taking so? I mean, you're the one that said you're urgent. I don't know. Maybe my sense of urgency is different from your sense of urgency.
We're working expeditiously.
What does that mean, though?
We're very short order. We'll have
What does short order mean?
We're working in the next several weeks to have a HAP annual report produced.
So why? I mean, you're coming to hearing today, and you can't tell us how many. We spent billions of dollars, and you can't tell us at all how many people we've helped.
Apologies, I don't have the information in front of me to share.
You have it in your office?
Again, we're working through data quality issues in order to finalize a report.
All right. So obviously it went on for a while. It was about a 2-hour hearing, something like that. But pretty eye opening. What are your thoughts just hearing that?
Wow. I can't even imagine having been on that committee. You must have just...
I was sitting next to him.
Okay,
actually.
okay, exactly.
So I was like kind of cheering him on, like, hey, keep asking these questions.
Yeah, that was an impressive. I'm so glad he's asking those hard-hitting questions.
Yeah.
I feel like we get those all the time in the district, right? People are frustrated at their wits' end. It was a complete failure on government's part. What are they doing? It's wild to me that they're asking for more money, right? For the transparency, for the accountability. How much more? I can't even, it's so frustrating to me.
Well, and what I've said, it's like, hey, any future money that you receive for these programs, take a percentage of that, spend it on transparency, tracking your outcomes. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I
feel like that's a very easy fulfillment. I just, it shocks me that they can waste so much money and victimize so many people. Those that need help, right?
Yeah.
The homeowners, but it's wild to me.
Yeah.
That we've allowed it to go on so long.
Yeah, it was really a really great committee discussion, a lot of bipartisan frustration, which I appreciate. The interesting thing about Assemblymember Ting is he was the budget chair over the last, he's not this year, but over the last few years, he's been the chair of the budget committee. And he was the one that approved the allocations for these programs, right? So he is obviously frustrated because we gave you all this money. You can't even tell us who it helped. In fact, if you look at the numbers, homelessness has gotten worse. So it's just, I'm glad to see the bipartisan frustration growing.
Same.
That it's not just like, one side saying, hey, this is a problem, but it's both sides saying,
I feel like he
this is
probably,
ridiculous.
based on his district too, right? And so many of our colleagues' districts that they see this very vividly every single day. So it's nice to see a good bipartisan effort asking and demanding change.
Well, and he represents San Francisco.
Right.
So obviously, like for the listeners, like obviously a hotbed of homelessness and growth in homelessness. So just really so ongoing saga on this issue. And it's not going to be solved overnight, but I think the more light that we can shine on these issues, I think the closer we'll get to.
Well, and I think your oversight on the audit, right?
Yeah,
all of that, you're leading the charge on that, and you're asking really great questions, and it's nice to see. It's refreshing.
Oh yeah, we'll keep doing it. We'll keep it going. I'm hoping they don't torpedo my bill in appropriations, but we'll see what happens. Like it was funny. So yesterday, so when you have bills and appropriations on the suspense file, for people that might not know what that means, essentially. They're being held for cost concerns. And the chair of the committee and the committee has basically the power to either let those go forward or hold them in her committee and keep them from going forward. And so all the members line up at her door to ask her to prioritize their bills, of course. And this is my top priority bill this year, is this transparency bill on homelessness. But yesterday I met with her and I walked out and you were standing there. So
I will say, though, it's been great to work with her as vice chair. She's been awesome. And she and I work really well together. So it's nice.
And she actually cares about on certain issues, like when we were talking about my bill on smartphones in schools, she cares deeply about that issue, right?
She does.
So you can really connect on a very, on a policy level too, which is great. Well, I've kept you long enough. Do you have any final thoughts before we call it a day here?
Okay. I love being on the show. You're welcome to have me back anytime you'll have me.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
I love hearing that. I appreciate it. And we definitely would love to have you back.
Awesome.
I know that, maybe we'll get you up on that ranking list of the least talkative. And
maybe they can
this will be a good
practice.
Yeah. Or we'll send this to Cal Matters and maybe they can count it. I don't know.
That's funny.
But it was really great having you on today. I've been, definitely wanted to have you on for a while. So I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
Next week, we'll have Assemblymember Greg Wallace on the podcast again, returning. If you want to share ideas for future shows, you can email pointoforderpod@gmail.com. Obviously, listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can watch, subscribe, or follow on YouTube, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Point of Order Pod. And you can follow today's hosts on X at Joshua_Hoover for myself. And then Kate Sanchez, you can follow her at ASMKATESANCHEZ. So ASM Kate Sanchez.
That's right.
And you've got some good stuff on Twitter. So hopefully people will give you a little follow.
Thank you.
And Kate, it was great having you. We'll see you again next time.
See you next time.
Bye.